I loved one of your quotes was that we're being bullied by our own unfinished business. I thought that was a brilliant quote because I was talking about unresolved emotions. We are bullying ourselves with what we haven't dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which causes us to have these trigger reactions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you stated it very well, and that was my big realization in the book. I have a specific quote in the introduction. I'm going to see if I can find it fast because it kind of summarizes. So here it is. It's on page 6. Our goal is not to root out all our triggers, in other words, get rid of them, but to find a trailhead from them into the psychological and spiritual work that has so long awaited us. This is how we turn triggers into tools that, make them lead to healing. So that's why it says stop reacting and start healing.
Insight and Awareness Spiritual Explorer. Soul intuitive, emotional and spiritual mentor and award-winning author, Lorraine Nilon.
Welcome, explorers, and our guest today is David Richo, Dave, and he's a psychotherapist and an author of many books, but the book we're going to talk about today is Triggers. How do we stop reacting and start healing? So thank you for being here, Dave. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for inviting me, Lorraine.
No worries at all. So triggers, we have become very aware of triggers, seeing as we have to put trigger warnings on everything and all the rest of it. So what is it that we need to know about them?
The big discovery I made about triggers as I looked into them and how they happened to me and to my clients. By the way, the origin of the book is kind of interesting. This is what the book looks like.
Lovely.
So it's Triggers, how we can stop reacting and start healing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's from Shambhala. And I asked myself before writing it, what's the word you hear most from clients? And it is triggers. I was triggered.
Yeah.
So that led me to this book, to the writing of this book. But to be triggered is to be stimulated in such a way that you react. And at first I thought, well, my topic will be how to deal with the reaction. But my big realization was that the places in which we're triggered go back to early trauma or unfinished business, especially from childhood. And
actually, I loved one of your quotes was that we're being bullied by our own unfinished business. I thought that was a brilliant quote because I was talking about unresolved emotions. We are bullying ourselves with what we haven't dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which causes us to have these trigger reactions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you stated it very well, and that was my big realization in the book. I have a specific quote in the introduction. I'm going to see if I can find it fast because it kind of summarizes. So here it is. It's on page 6. Our goal is not to root out all our triggers, in other words, get rid of them, but to find a trailhead from them into the psychological and spiritual work that has so long awaited us. This is how we turn triggers into tools that, make them lead to healing. So that's why it says stop reacting and start healing instead of stop reacting and start responding in a healthy way.
Because I was going to say, because that's what I see with people is they react and then they start reacting to the reaction and then they start reacting to that reaction. And And then all
Right.
of a sudden you're getting a long way from what actually was triggered to reacting and responding to these feelings that you're having about the reaction, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Yeah. So you're pulling yourself further away from the actual issue. And whereas if you lean in, and I liked what you just read out, was one of, I've actually got that on my notes, is that's what we're kind of avoiding. We resist, deny, and avoid going into that, using it as a tool, where that one change can make such a huge difference.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So if you look at like what mainly triggers you, you can actually identify what triggers you. For instance, I'll use the same example I used in the book. Let's say you notice that you feel uncomfortable or even afraid if you displease authority,
Mm-hmm.
or displease a man, or displease a woman. It could be that something happened in early life. For instance, you displeased your mother and you were punished, displeased your father and you were rejected, displeased authority and you were punished. That created this trigger sensitivity. And now, ever after, you find yourself scared when you do something that triggers a dislike towards you from man, woman, or authority. And that shows you where your work is.
Yeah.
So that's why when we work with triggers, we come to a healing. It does double duty. Not only do we get over our trigger if possible, and it's highly impossible that you'll get over triggers fully, but you can at least reduce the thud with which they land on you. And you can even do some work on what happened to you in the past.
Yeah. Oh, that's an interesting statement. So you believe that we don't ever fully recover from them, or we'll never get to a point where we don't have a reaction. We just lessen the reaction.
It lessens and lessens,
Yeah.
as opposed to disappears entirely.
Yeah.
It could happen that a lighter one will disappear entirely, but uh, we're doing pretty well if we reduce the impact.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So
And
it doesn't throw us for a loop anymore.
yeah. And I say to people, like, if you identify a trigger and you have, you start dealing with the inner work, get an understanding. Once you get an understanding, you can pull your awareness to it, and then you can manage your reaction. But it's like, you can't change your history. Like,
Right.
your history is always going to be your history. Your reaction will change. So, and I think it's a big misconception for people to believe that they can just get rid of it. It's just like, no, you're trying to work out how to manage it. And if you manage it well, then it becomes, oh yeah. And sometimes it can actually get to a point where you go, oh yeah, that's kicked off a memory, but moving on. So yeah, so it's fascinating, really, isn't it? Because we can have, that can trip us up if we have a big misconception about, I'm going to get rid of this completely, and when we don't, it triggers us
Right.
to think we haven't dealt with anything, and we go back in and beat ourselves up, and we do those beautiful patterns of self-sabotage from a misconception.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's much more compassionate toward yourself to say, my work is to lessen how much this affects me, rather than get rid of it altogether.
Yeah, agree. Yeah, it gives you good grounding. Why do people, what's their biggest struggle to actually start dealing with their struggle, with their triggers? Why do people shy away from it?
From working on triggers?
Yeah.
For one thing, I think we're, as with any trauma, we don't want to go back to it even in our memory, because we're still reeling or reverberating from how painful it was. So we don't want to go back and look at it again, because we're imagining that just to look at it will itself be painful. And we're probably right.
Yeah.
But if we look at it in the context of self-healing or in the context of therapy, we're placing ourselves in an environment that makes it safer to look at. So that's our only hope, that we find a way to look at it safely.
Yeah.
And you could do this in your own work, but therapy could also make a big difference. If the therapist is someone who is knowledgeable about how to work with trauma, because that is a specialty.
Yeah, exactly. And it is feeling safe. You know, that's if you're going back to any form of trauma, the key is for you to feel safe and not judged. Yeah. Which is
because every trauma made you unsafe. So the only way that you're ever going to work with your trauma is in an atmosphere of safety.
Yeah, for sure.
If you had a trauma in battle during wartime, you wouldn't be able to work it through in the next battle, because that's unsafe also.
Yeah.
You'd have to wait until the war was over and then work on it in your therapy. When you feel safe in an office with somebody you trust, you're more likely to be able to look at it. And of course, it's also a matter of timing. Your body has to let you know when it's ready to look into how hurt you were. And no good therapist would ever try to force you into it. They wouldn't say, a good therapist will not say, well, let's go there right now. Let's look at what happened in Vietnam. No, a good therapist will say, when you're ready to look at it, we'll look at it together.
Yeah. And what kind of things can happen if you're looking at it before you're ready?
You can be re-traumatized and make it even worse. So that's what we're trying to avoid.
Yeah. And when
the triggers in life are little invitations, like, hey, here it is. This is what happened to you. And in a much bigger way. And you want to take a look. And when you react, you're basically saying, no, I'm not ready yet. Because you're taking it literally as if it's about what's happening in the present.
Yeah.
You would never be triggered if it were only about the present. You would simply respond.
Oh, okay. You see, I look at reactions as a bit like what I've seen in your notes is about they're giving you clues. You know, like you might not understand the full picture, but it's telling you that something's not in flow for you, if you want to use that language, or there's still something, unfinished business, to quote you. So it's like when you give yourself permission to acknowledge it from that angle, instead of feeling like a victim to something that's happening to you that you feel out of control of, all of a sudden it's like you can turn that around and say, okay, there's something going on here. I know I don't fully understand it, but I'm going to give myself the chance and the opportunity to start. I use the word explore it, because it's a layered process. You don't just, if you're being triggered about something, you're not just going to get one answer and then it go away. You're going to have to go through the layers of understanding, because you've got belief systems, you've got fears, you've got, resistance, denial, and avoidance sort of techniques. So survival mechanisms all over them. So it's really breaking it down to allowing yourself to see what you are actually reacting to, because you might be reacting to one thing. Well, this is what I found with people, is that some people, they're reacting to a certain thing, but it's morphed from the actual trigger, you know. So there's a whole history behind even the reaction that might be concealing something, or it might actually just be how you've turned and twisted, because you haven't been able to process it. It's not that you've done anything wrong, you just haven't been able to process it. So you get stuck in these, you know, I call them merry-go-rounds. So we're quite complex when we get into our emotions and how we're reacting and our belief systems.
Yes, very much so.
And when you're looking at someone's triggers, what kind of things are you trying to identify in them?
Okay, well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I want to clarify,
Mm-hmm.
and I do point this out in the book. I've been concentrating in our conversation on what happened to us in childhood,
Mm-hmm.
but in the book, I point out that there are many sources from which the triggers emanate, and I identify 3.
Right.
They spell the word see, help you see, S-E-E.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be that what triggers you is coming from your own S shadow, E ego, E early life. So I mentioned early life.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'll mention the other 2 possibilities of the 3 that I identified, from which a trigger can emerge. Shadow means, it's a Jungian term referring to the parts of ourselves that we hide because we're ashamed of them, or we've repressed them for whatever reason. And yet we see them in other people very clearly. We project onto others something that really is about ourselves. So, for instance, I'm triggered by people who are controlling, and I think I'm not controlling. But actually, I would only be triggered by people who are controlling if I myself were not hiding that from myself. There's a poem by Emily Dickinson: "Our self behind our self concealed should startle most." So we should be the most triggered by the hidden self. And we see those hidden qualities in other people, but we don't realize they're in ourselves. So they're unconscious to us, or disavowed, shall we say. So that's another source of triggers. And then the second source is our big fat ego. How dare he insult me? How dare he not realize I'm so wonderful? How dare he come at me that way? Doesn't he realize I'm a big shot? We understand that style.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be that that's what's being wounded, is your ego. It's getting a little punctured from its inflated state.
Yeah.
So in some triggers, we're seeing ourselves as we really are and don't like it. In some, our ego is being bruised or wounded. And in others, we're seeing what happened to us in childhood or in past relationships. And in all 3, there will be some kind of painful dimension, but only in the 3rd one is it real trauma. The one having to do with childhood and how people have treated us in past relationships.
Yeah.
The first one is more like, I'm not acknowledging who I really am. Would you like to hear the whole poem?
I'm interested in how you're.
The poem tells you what the shadow is like. One need not be a chamber to be haunted. One need not be a house. The brain has corridors surpassing material place, far safer of a midnight meeting, external ghost, than the interior confronting our cooler host. Far safer through an abbey gallop, the stones a chase, than unarmed oneself encounter in a lonesome place. Ourself behind ourself, concealed, should startle most. Assassin hid in our apartment be horror's least. The body borrows a revolver and bolts the door, or looking a superior specter or more. So she's saying, we think the danger is coming from the outside, but really it's coming from the hidden inside. The self behind the self concealed, going all the way back to when we were first haunted by whatever spirits, metaphorically speaking, by whoever came at us in a harming way, damaging way. And what the household we came from, in which it wasn't safe to show all of ourselves. So we had to hide some parts.
Yeah.
That's what she means by our self behind our self concealed. Anyway, you get the concept.
No, it's good. It's good. And it is, like even when you are pulling apart trauma, whether it's, trauma's from anything that's hurt you, like really hurt you. So childhood abuse or neglect or relationship, especially now that we're in the era of narcissism, insensitivity and indifference. Well, I always say that this is how I explain trauma for my own understanding, really, is that when you recognize someone is completely indifferent to you, so they're going to behave, say things, do things, etc., that are going to cause you harm, whether it's, you hurt your feelings or cause you, abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, all that kind of thing. I believe that we respond to the indifference, that we know that this person has not put us in their consideration. We're not part of, we're pawns in their stage, basically. And this is what we respond to because it makes us feel worthless. It makes us feel, unnoticed, all those kind of things. And it also threatens us because when someone is indifferent to you, it means you can't feel their boundaries. I can get really angry and there's a boundary. I might yell and scream and carry on and whinge about something. But you're going to tell that that's as far as I'm going to go. I'm not going to go past that point because you can feel my boundary. I'm not going to hit. I'm not going to do any of that sort of thing. So you can feel my boundary. When you can't feel someone else's boundary and you're experiencing their indifference and it feels towards you, but it's towards everything that they're actually doing, that's what scares us. And that's part of what causes that emotional trauma. That's my understanding of it. So anytime that particular person feels someone else's indifference, and it may be, they've walked into a shop and the shop assistant's busy and you want to ask her a question and she's not looking at you, she's not acknowledging you, all that sort of stuff. If you read that as indifference instead of being able to say, oh, look, she's flat out, she's busy. This isn't about me. There's the ego, right? So it all comes into combination at times. And then you go, oh, she's really indifferent to me. Then you're going to have that emotional response back into that history. And that's how I see trauma emotional trauma developing in a lot of people. And then we become indifferent to ourselves. We reject the good parts of ourselves. We don't recognize the kind heart that we've got or that we didn't deserve it. You know what I mean? We start thinking that, there's a reason why someone treated me that way. I must be and then all the misconceptions come in. I'm sure you could give us a big long list of that. So this indifference exchange becomes this cycle that keeps feeding the trauma. And that's why I love your statement about it's unfinished business, is to really deal with trauma, is we've got to deal with the indifference. And that self behind us is the one that knows that these are the reasons why you're responding that way. And when, because I notice when people really get their head around whatever it is they've experienced, if it's childhood abuse, narcissistic relationships, or, anything that they, even natural disasters, when they deal with it, they actually see that even at the time they knew more than what they realized. So that's this other part of themselves was very much aware, but our fear caused us to shut it down, or our hurt caused us to shut it down. And then we tried to suppress, often not very successfully, because it manifests out in other ways. So that's how I understand trauma and our response to it. And, I like the poem because it is explaining so many different elements to how we don't really see ourselves. And we always get shocked when we look back and we go, oh, is that what I did? We always, we go, there's always that moment of, oh my God, I played a part in that. Did I? Oh yeah. I wasn't just the victim in certain circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
Not in all, but in certain circumstances, I can see my part and how it kept keeping the merry-go-round going around. So, which is fascinating, how human nature works, and how I always say it's complex. It's understanding it is not a one size fits all.
That's for sure. Even though that might have been the style when we went to school as children, they were doing one size fits all.
Yeah.
I mean, they had to with 40 kids in this class, but, nobody was turning to you as an individual and saying, now, what's your way of learning? Do you learn better by words, by images, by movement?
Yeah.
We just all had to memorize and so forth.
Yeah.
We were all the same.
Yeah.
And, somehow it all works because we know how to read and write. But
well, that's exactly right. Yeah.
You see what I mean?
I do. So what should be our first reaction when we feel a trigger? If we're trying to help ourselves and we've been triggered, regardless of our history, regardless of what form, what should be our first port of call, or what will help us the most if we can remember to do it?
The first thing to remember is I may overreact if I don't look at this carefully and see how much of what I'm feeling right now is coming from my own shadow, ego, or early life stuff rather than from the other person. So the other person is indifferent toward me. Mm-hmm. That's one of my areas of triggering.
Yeah.
My parents were indifferent toward me. They paid all the attention to my brother or sister, let's say. And I was just like a minor character. I didn't receive the attention that a human person needs. Now this person is indifferent, and piggybacking on this person's indifference are all my traumatic reactions to that from the past. So I'm going to have to leave that, put that aside, and just witness what's happening in as simple and direct and immediate here and now way as possible, and not bring my own stuff in. Now, it's not as if you're going to say all that in the moment, but you can be practicing this in the ordinary light of day so that when you are triggered, you distinguish, okay, how much of this is about this person and how much of this is my stuff.
Yeah. That's an important question, isn't it? You know, and if you don't know, just say, I don't know. You know,
Yeah.
don't try and give yourself an answer. Just go, I'm not sure what's happening here. And that just, I always think if you come to any level of honesty that you can get with yourself, you're starting to build the stepping stones to move out of something. So,
Mhm.
yeah. So, yeah. And how do
The other important
sorry.
thing is it's important for any of us to know what our specific main triggers are. For instance, if one person might be triggered by feeling cheated,
Mm.
I'm always on the lookout because somebody might cheat me. I can't call the plumber because he might overcharge me. So I'll just live with a leaking faucet. I'm just making this up.
Yeah.
Um, so I have to say to myself, wait a minute, this is all about avoiding a trigger, and I'm not really being sensible about how to manage and take care of my home. So somehow I have to work on how much I'm triggered. Now, some triggers you can work on with uh, with a different kind of therapy. It doesn't have to be talk therapy. You can do EMDR, for instance. That's a really helpful therapy to work your triggers with.
I think with any type of therapy is that you work out what works for you.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? Because there's certain things I respond very well to. You know, for me, it's about getting an understanding so that I can then make a conscious choice. And I need to bring it to a place where I can go, okay, that makes sense to me. Even though I do know that, you know, emotional things, sometimes you just go, that's not logic, but I can see how that all pieces together. I respond well to that. Whereas, you know, some other therapies, I just don't respond to them. And which is fine. That's, you know, we're all very unique. So it's about finding, and even the therapist, you know, finding someone that you feel very comfortable with and that you trust. If you're feeling nervous with your therapist, then they're not your therapist. You know, like if you feel, you know, judged or that you're sitting there doing something wrong, which, you know, I've had a few people say, I went to so-and-so and I felt like I was doing something wrong because I wasn't getting the results. It just means you two don't gel. You know, you just haven't gelled.
Yeah, and that would be an example of you don't feel safe.
Exactly.
You can't work on anything except in what Winnicott, D.W. Winnicott, who is a British child psychiatrist, what he calls the holding environment. You have to have an environment in which you feel held,
Yeah.
which it's safe to be who you are and you won't be judged.
Yeah.
And that would be true of relationships also.
Yes.
My other book is called How to Be an Adult in Relationships, and it's mainly about that. Like, how do you create a relationship in which you both feel safe to be yourselves?
Yeah.
Or however many people are in the relationship.
Right. So regardless if it's a one-on-one or a family unit or a friend group or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you feel that people are starting to really struggle to know how to be in relationships with other people? Are we becoming less sensitive to each other or less able to hold that space for each other?
You know, it does become harder and harder, and it's directly related to how much we're on this,
Phone.
you know, and how much we're have become so glued to what's happening in the social media.
Yeah.
It really does affect our relationships with other people.
Yeah, I seen a sign on a preschool the other day. Please put your phone away before you pick up your child. And I thought, oh, I think it's brilliant that they're saying, walk in the door. This is about, you and your child meeting. But I thought how sad it is that there has to be a sign to remind us.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a bit, that's very sad. So you're looking at a lot of potential clients, Dave. do you know what I mean? Like because we're becoming detached, and our communications detached from actually, it's different when you're face to face and you're having a conversation with someone, and it's I mean, even this is a little bit detached to what we'd be different again if we were standing in the same room.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, because there's a feel, there's a presence that is stronger because we are standing next to each other. We get the essence of each other through having conversations this way, but that there is a difference. There's a detachment from it. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and that we're human. We need to feel connected.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to feel it. We know we are, but we need to feel it. What would be your takeaway advice for anyone that is struggling with feeling constantly triggered and feeling like they're not having healthy relationships? What is it you think they need to know?
It would be a matter then of looking into what's really going on with you that's still so unfinished and that needs attention of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
How can I finally look at myself from the three perspectives? My shadow side, the side that I'm hiding from myself, but see and I'm triggered by in others. The ego that insists on being in control and being entitled to special treatment and being, shall we say, so inflated that it's forgotten how to relate to people in a respectful, loving way.
That was diplomatically put, Dave. I liked how you put that.
And then, of course, what happened in the past, both childhood and relationship past.
Yeah.
Not just childhood.
Yeah.
Because we could have been traumatized in relationships with other people as adults.
Oh, well, a lot of us are. You know what I mean? A lot of us are. And it can be work colleagues, it can be friends, relatives, partners. There's a whole, because as soon as someone responds in a way to you, especially if it's consistent, that you never expected to happen, or you didn't, or you don't understand, I had one of the previous guests, Stephanie Sarazen, she talks about ambiguous grief, where we have these relationships with people, they break down for certain reasons and we don't understand them, and we're grieving someone that's still alive. So that's a very hurtful experience. And I'm sure there's not a person on the planet that hasn't had some form of that. So yeah, so trauma's not always anchored in our past, as like what you're saying. Yeah, it's fascinating.
By the way, when you use the word relatives, you reminded me, nobody is as skilled to trigger you. Nobody knows your buttons as much as your family.
That is true. That is true.
So don't be surprised if you get triggered when you're around family members, because they are experts on knowing which of your triggers to press.
Yes.
And, you just want to be careful about that.
Yeah, and you can take that as more indifferent towards you because they know why they're triggers to you. So when you see someone using them, it feels more indifferent to you because they have a history and understanding of why that does hurt you. So it feels more intentional. Sometimes it is. Sometimes we got to work out if it's just our response to something and their intention was different, but we're taking it that way. So yeah, you know what I mean? There's a combination. We can't just put a blanket statement over it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a healthy alternative would be that more and more we could be, we could become witnesses rather than victims of what people do.
Yes.
So the idea of being the fair witness, or in Buddhism, the mindful witness, in all our relationships. Not that we're indifferent by just being a witness, but that when it comes to triggering events, we want to move in the direction of witnessing rather than being hit by the arrows that come our way. We're learning just to fend them off and to notice them and to avoid them. But it's just a beautiful thing to become the witness.
I talk a lot about the objective observer, which is the same. It's same idea, exactly the same, just different words. And the thing is, you can't avoid those arrows. If someone has deliberately, bonged one off at you, you're going to have a reaction. But if you objectively observe it, it can go back to your beautiful quote about it can be a tool for you to find your stuff. Okay, that arrow hit. So what did it hit? Thank you. Right. You do you over there. I'm moving over here, but I'm going to take notice of that tool that is through our exchange I've just found. Because as soon as we go into that victimhood, and it's the first port of call, we all do it, we go, oh, that hurt. If we stay in there, so even that as a triggered reaction, okay, you've had the reaction, it's staying in there that's the problem. Because as soon as you're triggered, if you don't deal with your own stuff, regardless of what the other person's intention is, you become the person that's victimizing yourself. And then all of a sudden you can take that one little event or big event, depending on what it is, one statement, and you can run with it for months and months and months, hurting yourself. The other person's forgot it. They've moved on. They've left the building. So, see you next Christmas, basically. Yeah. So it's that's why it's important to be that witness for yourself and to really acknowledge the shadow self, because it's the one that you're trying to get that unfinished business. I really like your quote, that get that unfinished business sorted, at least looked at, or at least understand it, so that if you are triggered, your recovery time's quicker.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good way to put it.
Yeah. Brilliant.
And you start using the triggers as information about yourself.
Yeah.
And what you need to work on.
Yeah. Love that.
Rather than about the other person.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful objective observer, or, be your own witness to yourself. Yeah. Love that. All right. Well, I think it's time to play Flip the Book. So it's an intuitive game. So you've got 3 books to pick from. Would you like book 1, 2, or 3? I know you can't see them.
Okay, 1.
1. That's your Insight and Awareness book, and it's 430 pages to pick from.
Page 12.
12. Oh, it's actually a picture. So I'm going to hold that up for you. Can you see that?
It's a woman standing in a swirling bowl.
Full of emotions. Yeah.
It's full of emotion.
Yeah. So what that represents is her shadow side. It is her unresolved emotions.
Yes.
So there's a list of, there's 100 words in there. And then within that vortex is actually the truth of the person.
Yes.
So is that how you would sum up who we are and what we're doing?
Yeah, very much so.
Beautiful. And
I do see that over her head there's a light.
Yes.
And we do want to, which kind of represents I'm still connected to a higher power than my ego.
Yes.
The ego is swirling, has all these emotions swirling around, but I need to trust that I still have a connection to something that's greater than my ego.
Yes. I think that's so important to remember that. So wherever we come from, whatever label everyone wants to put on it, I call it true source, divine origin consciousness, just so that I'm not in any particular religion or belief or whatever. But the essence from where I come from, I am always connected to. And my emotional baggage and my ego is like this big blanket that I put over the top of myself. And sometimes I forget that I am part of the consciousness, and that is the truth of who I am. And that's, to me, freedom is coming back to that part of myself. Yeah. So
I like that idea of how we continually have to remind ourselves of a connection.
Yeah.
That is not full of trauma.
Yes.
That wants to help us in some way.
Yeah. And we're of it.
Yeah.
It's not, we're of that same energy. We're of that, whether you want to call it divinity, but we're of that. At the core of our being, we are of that same energy. And this emotional baggage that we carry is the vortex that gets in the way of us witnessing the truth of ourselves.
When you mention religion, that's also a source of triggering.
Yeah, for many. Yeah, definitely.
The guilt tripping and depending on how you were brought up. And as adults, we have to ask ourselves, how much of what they taught me do I want to hold on to? And how much do I need to scuttle?
Yeah, yeah. And I think, too, some people get frightened of exploring those concepts, but it's like anything that's of truth, you can explore and the truth will remain, because truth is the base, and then we pile all the other stuff on top. It's like our self there. The truth is you are of that consciousness, that divinity, the untraumatized soul is who you are at the essence of yourself. And then on top of that is all these experiences that we haven't been able to deal with. And, they're our life lessons, I suppose, is to come back to resolve them. And we can learn a lot from our trauma that's also going to expose to us the truth of our consciousness. So it's not all negative. And sometimes I say to clients, stop trying to fix yourself. Like, stop trying, because you're telling yourself there's something wrong. Stop trying to fix yourself. Now let's have a look at what you've experienced and what opportunities we can take from it. And so that you get a better understanding of who you are and what you've experienced. And then see where you go from there.
Yeah, and that would be your inner resources.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Which I think the social media and how consumed we are with it all, like we're becoming detached from those inner resources, not just our own relationships. So it's important for us to be the witness of our own soul. Yeah. It's been a very interesting conversation and I've enjoyed it. Thank you, Dave.
Well, thank you.